Welcome to the Night Tube. I'm Stephen Knight, and it's a great pleasure to welcome the return of Andrew Doyle. Andrew, good to see you. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm a bit tired today for some reason. I've overslept, so I'll try and make myself more active during the course of our conversation. I've got some Diet Coke, so that normally helps.
See, there's no sugar in that. I mean, barely any caffeine. You need to get some of that meth. You want some meth, is what you want.
Do I?
Yeah.
I thought there was quite a lot of caffeine in Diet Coke. That was my
maybe
feeling about it. Yeah.
We'll see.
That's my hope, anyway.
We'll see.
What happens if I start nodding off about halfway through? Then we'll know.
Yeah, but I mean,
failed experiment.
That might not necessarily be the Coke.
It might be you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll see.
Well.
Basically, we're doing science for the next hour.
Yeah, you have that kind of soporific voice. Sometimes I like to listen to that and go to sleep. Actually, that sounds really creepy. I'll take that back.
Oh, wonderful! Great place to start.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm in a funny mood. I'm in a stupid fucking mood. I don't know why.
I think
I'll get serious now. I'll get my mind in.
Yeah, I think everyone's getting a little bit of cabin fever, a little bit thrown out of sync with life in general with the lockdown.
No, you know what I think it is? It's because I'm working on this new book, and it means that that's all I'm thinking about and all I'm doing.
Another book?
A new book, yeah. So this is a non-fiction book about the culture war and about social justice, and it's got to be done by Christmas because we want it out in the spring, and so it's quite a tight deadline. So now this is all I'm doing and all I'm thinking about, and I keep having to, if friends ask me to meet up or anything, I keep having to make excuses. Because I just don't have time. I'm going to have to become like this hermit for a while, and I think it's driving me a bit mad. I always get this when I have a singular project, and I'm just focused on one thing. I lose my basic social skills. They slip away from me because I think they're like a muscle. You need to continually train them.
Well, do you find that you thrive under that sort of pressure, the looming deadline, or are you someone who's better? Are you told you've got an indeterminable amount of time and just work at your leisure?
I think I'm like most writers that if I don't have a deadline, it will never get done.
Yeah.
So I think that's totally fair enough. But also because it's stuff I've been writing about for the past 5 years, I keep having to remind myself while I'm working on it. I'm like, am I repeating myself here? Have I just said all this before? And of course, it's a standalone book. It isn't. I can't link it to old articles I've written or assume that people have any prior knowledge of what I'm talking about. So it's a totally different beast. And
not in the point of view of any satirical characters. This is Andrew Doyle Unleashed.
Yeah, I suppose you could put it that way. Just me, just saying what I think rather than conveying it through another character, yeah.
Well, I think it might have been the last time we saw each other in the flesh, and maybe, possibly not, I'm not sure, but we were both present in October at the conference, what was it titled? Speaking Truth to Social Justice, and that was hosted by Sovereign Nations. And seemed, a lovely event, lovely venue. However, I've noticed a few people are using the fact that the organisers are conservative Christians, or I think they've called them right-wing Christians as well. Obviously, we have to get that in Natch. And they're using this sort of guilt by association to sort of say people who are attacking social justice are showing their true colours. Their inner conservatism's coming out. Their inner right-wing beast is coming out because we're associating with conservative Christians. And I'm just wondering, how much do you worry about associations, given this sort of work and this sort of polemic doesn't tend to get a whole host of support from your typical liberal allies? So we do find ourselves in the same room as people who might be our ideological mirrors, perhaps. I'm just wondering how much thought have you give to that?
Well, I mean, they were saying this at the time of the conference.
Yeah.
Was this really only last October? It feels like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Everything that's happened in the interim. But, I mean, at the time, I remember so it was myself, Helen Pluckrose, James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, who were giving the speeches, wasn't it? And then we had a panel with the organiser, Michael O'Fallon of Sovereign Nations. And at the time, I remember Richard Dawkins had tweeted about the event and encouraged people to go along. And then he got a lot of flack because people were saying, well, look, this is run by an evangelical Christian group or whatever you want to call it. I don't know how Michael characterises himself, but he's very religious. And there were lots of religious people there, but there were also lots of atheists. I mean, I think we were sitting next to someone who runs the Secular Society or the Atheist Society.
Yeah.
In the UK. There was all sorts of people there. one of the things people got very upset about was that there was a prayer thing at the start, and that was obviously voluntary, and that was for the people who were Christians because it was a Sunday, and Christians do tend to pray on a Sunday, and that surely wasn't an issue. I mean, it wasn't like anyone was being forced to pray. This was something that was there for those who have faith. That didn't bother me at all. I didn't know why that was even raised as an issue. But that to me confirmed to me that actually I'm less and less do I care about the guilt by association thing. Less and less. I mean, if you remember at the time, I think not too long before that, I'd been on Fox News, on Tucker Carlson's show. There's a sense in which, and I remember getting some flack after that, but I just less and less I care. As you say, I don't have the Guardian or the New Statesman screaming at me, come and write for us, come and get on the platform. You don't. It's and I don't think there's anything wrong with being a Christian, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being a conservative. So the idea that I wouldn't associate people because they have those views doesn't make any sense to me. And so no, I care about it less, and I think fundamentally one of our biggest problems at the moment is that people aren't talking to each other. So I would rather be engaged in a dialogue with people of all stripes, people who have massively different opinions. That to me is far more interesting than just sitting with a group of completely like-minded people who agree on absolutely everything. I mean, I will say for that conference, I think we all, irrespective of our political allegiances, all agreed on the fundamental premise, which was that social justice was a potentially dangerous force. So there was a kind of unifying thing there. And you could say, well, that in itself is a kind of echo chamber scenario. But on the other hand, what we were arguing against was this kind of ubiquitous presence, which is absolutely everywhere. You can get those arguments anywhere in the mainstream media. So it was quite a worthwhile thing to do, I think. And it, as you know, the fact that there was such a diverse group of people there, and I mean diverse in every sense of that word, diverse, that it was fascinating. So, no, I've got no problem with it. I mean, look, since then I've written for the Daily Mail, which is apparently a terrible thing to do. I don't care. I just don't care. Like it's a major paper saying come and write an article about this. They don't tell me what to write. They don't tell me what opinions to have. I mean, what I would never do is go on a television show, radio show, or write for a paper that told me what I had to say, or said that, you've got to express these particular views because that's their editorializing. I'm never going to say something I don't believe to be true for money. But of course, that's the accusation you get, isn't it? If you get paid to do something that obviously you're just as a puppet or a mouthpiece. Yeah. Or something like that.
Everyone else's intentions are completely sincere and pure, and they're motivated by the desire to do good and spread the truth. But you, on the other hand, who has the wrong opinions, you're just in the pocket of the money men. I think that's how it works.
It comes from a kind of narcissism, doesn't it? This idea that if someone else disagrees with you, they must be being paid to say it. How is that anything other than narcissistic?
Yeah.
When I hear someone else who has a different opinion, I don't just assume, well, they must be lying because mine is the only opinion. That is a universal opinion. I don't make that assumption. So the things you do, they're curious beasts, aren't they? It's a curious thing. It's a curious way to behave.
Keeping on this topic of curious beasts and slightly linking in to the issue of religion and atheist groups, I've noticed that American atheist or secular organisations or humanist organisations in America specifically are quite poor on this topic of intersectionality and wokeness. And I would have imagined groups like that would have been primed for this because it mimics a religion in every possible way. It's, how authoritarian it is, its speech codes, its dogmas, its blasphemy laws, the way it's spread. And this is one of the things that turned me onto it straight away, having argued against fundamentalist religion for the longest time, could see this for what it was immediately. And I'm just wondering, why do you think these groups in America have been very slow to latch on to the problem of this ideology?
It's a very good question. I think you're right. I mean, the book I'm writing at the moment, I continually refer to it as the religion of social justice. I consider that I have been doing that for a number of years. And I think it is the right. It's a good immediate, accessible analogy. But what I'm not trying to do in saying that is to denigrate all religion. What I think is a closer analogy is it is a fundamentalist religion.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. But of course, for shorthand, it's much more sensible rhetorically just to call it a religion. I think, I know James Lindsay has recently written and argued that it should be classified officially as a religion and therefore have protections as a religious group. And by the same token should be kept out of the workplace. There should be, in other words, a separation of government and the state.
Invoke the First Amendment. That is a beautiful idea that he's had there.
Yeah. So, and maybe there's something to. I mean, I do still stick to the idea that there has to be a supernatural element to religion. I know Confucianism is arguably a religion, and I might not be 100% right. I might not be right at all on that, but that's my feeling about it. I think a belief in a deity or some kind of spirituality is quite important to religion. But I think in terms of understanding wokeness, yes, the religious analogy makes complete sense. Is it? I mean, I don't know because I don't move in those sort of atheist circles. But is it the case that they're ill-primed to deal with this because they have some sympathy with the cause? Is that maybe what it's about?
I think so. I've got a little theory, and it's complete conjecture, and it's just a thought. But I tend to find that a lot of the pushback from these groups in the States is directed at the government because the government to them represents this vision of conservative Christianity. The way it works over there is a little harsher. It's kind of a little bit more of a taboo to openly denounce God. In America, it's God and country. It's very much ingrained in the idea of the national character. I think you're very quickly conflated with communism if you announce yourself as an atheist. So I think a lot of these groups, what they've been doing over the years is fighting the government and the government's use of religion. And I think that comes with a lot of very far left sensibilities. I don't think a lot of their work is built on principles such as freedom of expression, individual liberty, true secularism. I think their anti-religious activism is kind of wrapped up in criticism of the state as well. So I think once they see an ideology that ostensibly claims to be protecting marginalised groups and protecting people from bigotry, I think they see that as just an extension of their work in combating the religiosity of the state.
This is interesting. So this goes back to what you're talking about alliances, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Insofar as if you're suggesting that hostility to Christian conservatism, it's almost as though it's almost like the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
This idea that and actually this is why I think it's important for us to be able to form these different alliances now. And I think I certainly talk about this stuff with people from the left, from the right, who are, I have friends now who are conservatives, and I didn't have many before all this kicked off. And it is that thing of recognizing the social justice movement as a unique threat, as something which is different, and actually is more important than any of these other differences we might have, because if they triumph, then we won't be able to have those conversations, So it's that's an interesting point. I mean, a mistrust of anyone. I mean, particularly if you take, for example, Donald Trump this week and his speech about critical race theory, that's very interesting because, of course, he's right, and the entire speech was absolutely spot on. And then, of course, what happens is the reaction is, but I don't want to be on the side of Trump, and therefore I'm not going to support what Trump says, and that's not the way you should be formulating arguments. It's perfectly possible for someone you disagree with or dislike to be right about a certain issue. I imagine, though, that now that he's weighed in on the culture war, it will put people off more, and maybe that will affect the atheist movements that you're describing as well. They certainly won't want to be seen to be in the same boat as Donald Trump on any issue whatsoever. But I think that's a mistake, because what you're doing is, in a sense, you're giving him too much power. You're surrendering the principle to someone you dislike, and you're saying he now owns that principle, and I can no longer express any view on that. And that, in a sense, is shooting yourself in the foot, because you're handing over, you're giving the power to the person you dislike to change your ability to speak about things.
Yeah, did you see the old hoo-ha around Princeton University and the letter? Now that I don't really care whether you think that's a just thing for the government to do, but it is hilarious, isn't it? We can say that much, surely.
It's totally logically correct.
Yes.
If an institution is saying admitting that they are fundamentally, no, the word is systemically racist. Now that means you have racism built into your very structure. If you're making that admission, then yes, you are violating civil rights law. You have to be.
Yeah.
I'm absolutely astonished. It's like when RADA in the UK, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, put out a statement saying we are an inherently racist school. I'm thinking, well, I wouldn't want anyone to go there. I would, why would students who are applying want to go to a racist university? And why are you admitting to being racist? That's really weird. I saw it with that film company, Bad Robot, put out a thing saying we are working hard to dismantle our white supremacy at work.
Yeah.
Why are you saying you're a white supremacist organisation? And if you are, then fuck you, because I don't like white supremacists. I don't like racists. So, they don't mean it, is the point.
Yeah, they're trying to flaunt their progressive credentials, aren't they?
Yeah. They know they're not racist. They know they're not white supremacists. By the way, a couple of weeks ago, the students at RADA produced it's a 100-page document of demands. It's hilarious. It's insane. And it's talking about how you must dismantle racism at RADA. You must hire this percentage of BAME directors and this percentage of BAME teachers. You must. It's so entitled and pompous, and it's just buying into all this critical race theory nonsense. It's unlettered. It's ill-informed, and they're just going to capitulate.
Yeah.
You know they are. So, well, they've already admitted that they're racist. Well, when they shouldn't, because they're not. Like, I think just don't admit to something you're not. You're opening a can of worms for yourself. And Princeton University, I'm glad this has happened, actually.
Yeah, it'll be a nice test, won't it? I mean, what's the outcome here? I'm assuming they'll have to climb back what they've said and said, actually, no, we're not racist. This is what we was attempting to do. Yeah,
they're in a really awkward position. They're going to have to prove to the government that they're not racist and maintain their stance to the public that they are. Well, good luck with that. I mean, it's just a mess, and it's happening more and more over here. That's what bothers me. We don't have the same history of race relations in the UK as we do in America, but activists over here are behaving as though we do, and that to me is, the idea that RADA is systemically racist. What a joke.
Yeah, agreed. And I do feel as well that, I mean, I've always took comfort in the fact that this feels like a very powerful minority, people who speak this way, people who put out these proclamations and demands, and the general public feels to me like they don't have much time for it. But obviously, the longer these people get a grip in our institutions, especially, from an academic perspective, they're essentially recruiting soldiers for this sort of woke ideology. And that worries me a little bit when we're talking about the next generation of legislators and business owners and things like that. I mean, do you think there is still an opportunity to dial this backwards at some point before it gets to this point where there's no return?
I hope so. I mean, we're living in this culture of what they call preference falsification, where most people are, saying views they don't necessarily think are true. I'll say, preference falsification is where you say something because you think it is the opinion that will be best received, and that's what most people in the country are doing. And the person who came up with that idea, and I wish I could remember his name now, he talks about what he calls preference cascade. There are historical moments where, particularly it happens in authoritarian regimes, where everyone is saying the thing they know they must say as opposed to the thing they actually think. And he says that this cascade happens, and it can happen very quickly, that all of a sudden there's some kind of trigger, and all of a sudden everyone just says what they really think. And I think the example he gives is the fall of the Soviet Union, actually. And it's because after that happened, there were very few people who would openly express that they supported the old regime, whereas of course at the time that would have been an unheard view. And obviously you can see this manifest itself in the West in terms of things like Brexit, or Donald Trump, where the polls are so far removed from what actually happens. The only reason that it happens, of course, is the anonymity of the ballot box. That's where people's true ideas come out. So we are definitely, I mean, I went for a drink with a friend yesterday, and this has happened to me a number of times where he chose, we were outdoors, and he chose a seat as far away from anyone else. He said, because I want to have a proper conversation. And and I get that, and that happens all the time. It's like, I want to talk openly, and so I can't be near someone because what I'm going to say is the unpopular, albeit most common view, right?
But bear in mind, this social pressure not to have certain views. You're not talking here about having a discussion about starting an ethno-state or, throwing gays off roofs or anything, really sinister. I assume you're talking about fairly commonly subscribed to politics within the general population that aren't necessarily represented in our institutions.
People who have concerns about the misogyny that's been thrown at J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
For the sin of saying that there's such a thing as biological sex. And people who want to talk about the problems we have in schools at the moment, the politicization of schools, all sorts of, these aren't controversial views that I'm talking about. I'm talking about people who are too afraid to express normal, mainstream, harmless viewpoints. That's weird, isn't it? And I don't think there's a precedent in our history of this where it's been quite like this.
Since you mentioned J.K. Rowling, I mean, that is something that has really concerned me because reading her work, it seems to me, or sorry, should I say, reading her output on this trans issue, it seems to me that it's coming from a place of sincere investigation and compassion and a pro-trans right perspective. And it really worries me that if someone as clear thinking as that and compassionate as that and liberal in her views on that can receive such treatment, what chance has the ordinary person got who may not be as articulate, may not know as much, and may not have her platform? I mean, it just feels to me now that this entire issue, if you're going to address the excesses of some trans activist, that is something that will get you in trouble faster than any other topic in 2020.
And the responses have been so far removed from the reality. The way that they have characterised what she said and done, it's absolutely clear they haven't read any of it.
Yeah.
And yet it's expressed with such certainty. I saw this the other day where a friend of mine posted on Facebook saying he thought that a lot of this was about misogyny, which I have absolutely no doubt it is, because so much of the vitriol she receives is explicitly misogynistic. But
it's very sexual, isn't it? I've seen a lot of
sexual, very sort of sexually aggressive threats of rape, all this sort of stuff, which I honestly haven't seen that extent of misogyny in my lifetime. In such a condensed, I've never seen that before. And so, but my friend put this thing out on Facebook and got bombarded by people, mutual friends of ours, and I'm thinking, but they're talking with such certainty. Oh, she talks about how she hates trans people, how trans people shouldn't have any rights, how she's trying to erase their existence. I'm like, so either you don't know what she said, that being the case, you probably shouldn't weigh in on the subject, right, without doing some basic reading, or you know and you don't care. That's more troubling. But you're more interested in promoting a false narrative, a false reality. That's far more frightening to me. And I think that goes for a lot of what's going on with the social justice movement, is this complete willingness to deny the reality before your eyes for the sake of political expediency. If you take the CNN report the other day when the Chiron was talking about largely peaceful protests, and in the background there were burning cars, burning buildings, right? Now, when they wrote that Chiron, there's absolutely no way that they could have thought that people couldn't see what was happening on the screen, right? There's no way that. But what they must be thinking, it doesn't matter. The truth is actually irrelevant, right? So that's what authoritarians do. That's why Chemical Ali was there saying there are no tanks in Baghdad. Well, there's tanks behind him. That's why this is the kind of behaviour that we don't expect from CNN.
Yeah.
But this, I mean, they call it gaslighting, and it's funny to me because gaslighting is the phrase that has been thrown about so much by the social justice activists, but they are the ones that commit it the most. And again, it's the projection thing, isn't it? But there comes to a point where you see, I always used to say that I think they're all very well intentioned, but when I see stuff like this complete denial of the reality before their eyes, I don't believe they're that stupid and that ignorant. That's someone who just doesn't care about truth, and that's a more sinister thing.
I mean, is that why people like you will lose the argument? Because if you're invested in truth and you want what is actual reality to be represented in your thoughts and your arguments, that's a lot of work at the end of the day, for one, and it doesn't produce the heat more often than not than a quick label will. So if somebody can smear you and destroy your reputation and get you out of the game, so to speak, isn't that a tactic that seems to win out more than producing truth?
Certainly does. J.K. Rowling in the position of not being able to be cancelled because she's a multimillionaire.
That helps.
I think for most people, they don't have that fuck you money, do they? And so therefore, at the moment, it is looking likely that people won't be speaking out with any great alacrity. But I think ultimately enough people will. I mean, I'm noticing it more and more is that prominent people more and more are sort of expressing the seeds of doubt, and that I think can have a cumulative effect ultimately. And I hope that it will. But I have no interest in, trying to predict the future. And I'm sure if I tried, I'd be wrong. I can only hope that people still just. Well, the advice I always give is if someone at your workplace tries to make you take unconscious bias training or diversity training, or tells you that you're racist because you're white, or talks about white privilege, that you do raise an objection, or refuse to participate or something. And I know, and I understand that it's easy for me to say because I'm not ever going to be in that position. I mean, I would never participate in anything like that, but nor would I ever be asked to. And nor am I going to lose my livelihood by taking that stance. So there is a sense in which I'm protected in that way. But and so therefore it's very easy for me to give that advice. But I do think it's important. I still stand by it, because I think the more people do that and take that stand, the harder it will become for the people to perpetuate the narrative that they know themselves to be false. I mean, we've got enough evidence and data now to basically discredit the utility of unconscious bias and implicit bias training. So why aren't we ditching it? Why, in fact, are members of Parliament now expected to take it? I know there's been, I think, 40-odd Conservatives who have say that they've refused, they're not going to do it. But why are they even being asked when we know it's not has no effect? Why? I mean, that to me is interesting. If it were the case that it was still very much speculative and maybe most of the experts think it might have a positive effect, then there might be a case for it. But the data's in on it, and we know it has no effect. So why are people? It can only be because people in power want to be seen to be doing something.
Yeah.
It's like Princeton saying that they're racist, and they obviously don't mean that. In fact, the data of Princeton is very clear that they can't be. If they're racist in any way, well, I mean, they are. I suppose they do have a racist policy against Asian Americans, insofar as they artificially cap the number of Asian Americans that can be admitted because they're the highest performing racial group. So I suppose there's that. You could. I mean, that to me is a form of systemic racism, sure. But that's not what they mean, is it?
No, I mean, it feels like the whole evolution versus creationism debate. Again, it feels like intelligent design's worming its way into, academic settings and governments and things like that. But, yeah. I mean, in terms of the discussion and the accusations thrown around with reference to J.K. Rowling, how much do you think our news media is culpable in this? Because I have seen them use the word transphobe to describe her in their articles and even some headlines, to the point where they're essentially saying it's been decided, this is a fact, this is something you should know going into this article. And it doesn't feel like there's much objectivity on this issue from sources that we trust for our news and our information.
I guess it's that they don't have time to read everything. Is that a generous interpretation? And, I mean, particularly people who work in the media, particularly the anchors on TV shows. I mean, they have to challenge and question, but they don't necessarily know all the details. But this is so fundamentally wrong. And I mean, I've seen you in arguments on Twitter about J.K. Rowling. If you ask someone to provide some evidence of something she said that's transphobic, it's never forthcoming, is it?
No,
it's not. It's just not there. It's so they won't be able to produce it. And you think though as well, if you're proven wrong, why wouldn't you want to say, "Oh, I'm"? Why wouldn't you want to make that admission? I mean, is it as straightforward as protecting your ego? Because if so, that's you're living your life as an infant. If that, I mean, I found this recently. I got into an argument with someone who, well, it was quite a big account, Twitter account, something like far right hate what, or someone something with a stupid name like that, and talking about how racist I was, and their evidence for this was that I'd never spoken out against the hostile environment policy and the Windrush scandal. And then, so I simply attached a video of me doing precisely that on national television for 3 minutes. and they couldn't admit they couldn't say it. Oh, we apologise. You clearly have
my mistake.
To quite a big audience as it happens, And it was quite a robust critique of Theresa May's hostile environment policy. I made absolutely there was no ambiguity here. They couldn't bring themselves to say. Then they just thought, oh yeah, but you write for Spiked and you do. That's all they could do. Then they were floundering, made complete fools of themselves. But the way to not make a fool of yourself is to admit that you're wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's quite an empowering thing, surely. Like, isn't it a good thing? Don't you want to be right? If someone corrects me on a factual error I've made, I am grateful for it. I don't understand this idea that you would get angry about it. And what it means is they're more interested in winning the argument than having the argument. They're not actually interested in what they're arguing about. They're interested in elevating their own status, like some kind of. Well, I know we're all primates, but that's basically it, isn't it? It's a thing about status, ego, these base instincts, and that's largely, I imagine, what's wrong with political discourse at the moment. That it's really about winning. It's really about power. It's not about being right, and that scares me a little bit.
Yeah, and for sure the worst platform for that would be Twitter, and I'm pleased to see you're still hanging on there despite the vitriol. But I mean,
do you not think I should get off? Do you not think I should?
Well, not now. Oh, okay, yeah. So,
no, not right now.
Well, no, I think it can be something you can learn to manage. I think once you've got past the point of letting it consume you, I think you're on safe ground. I've seen a few people be destroyed by it, and it's not necessarily pretty, but I mean, I suppose you could juxtapose that with the fact that Titania McGrath is very much a product of the Twitter platform. This is your satirical character that's just gone from strength to strength. We'll talk about your new book in her POV shortly, but how do you then balance that with the fact that Twitter's a cesspool that anyone who's sane should probably avoid as much as possible? However, one of the most successful things you do now was born in the fires of Twitter.
But she has to be on Twitter because she's a satire of social justice activists, and that is their domain.
That's their habitat.
So it wouldn't make sense for her to have originated elsewhere. I mean, I could have gone straight to writing books, but it wouldn't have really captured what those activists are. They use Twitter as their weapon. But that by no means the fact that an element of my career that has done well is based on Twitter doesn't mean that I don't hate the medium. I think it is a cesspit. I'm with you on that. I do look forward to the day when I'm off it for good. By the same token, I think given my resistance to the culture war, I just want this culture war to be over with, and I think part of I'd be a hypocrite, wouldn't I? I mean, I was saying earlier, I think everyone needs to speak out and say what they actually think, and if I just run away and hide from disputes, then I'm being a massive hypocrite. So yeah, I'll and God knows if it's actually making any difference. But I like to think that if everyone is saying what they really think at these times, it can be it can at least help. So I'll stay on it for the foreseeable, and then maybe just disappear one day.
Well, do you not find it slightly concerning as well that Twitter HQ seems to have the monopoly on who prospers in the realm of social and political commentary and journalism and activism? Because if you're not visible on Twitter and putting out your views there, you essentially don't exist to a large population. You are a non-person. Is
it? I mean, it's 20% of the country are on Twitter.
Is that right?
So I think so. That's the last figure I heard. So I don't know if it's all that drastic in that sense. I think I could leave and I could still be writing for the publications I write for and that kind of thing. I suppose. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, the media class are all on Twitter, aren't they?
Yeah, and not so much that as well. I mean, so assuming this 20% figure is right, that 20% still has a disproportionate amount of influence over what the news media talks about.
Well, it has a disproportionate influence over government policy.
Yes,
or the way the police behave, or that's where the conversations take place, is through social media, like it or not. As it happens, I don't like it, but that is the way. And indeed, I'm sure. I mean, I've got no, this is speculation, but I'm sure that the the tenor of discourse on social media has gravitated into real life. I think that can be the only explanation for the absolute ferocity and inability of people to discuss things like adults now, even on things like Newsnight or Question Time. Was even that. I mean, I know that they were always quite feisty programs, and I know that politics has always been combative. But I feel that this a step up when you get people like David Lammy saying other politicians are worse than Nazis and stuff like that. That's a statement straight out of Twitter world. That's not something that a serious politician says, is it? I mean, I know that you can go back to Nye Bevin saying that all Tories are like vermin or whatever he said, and you think so. There are these egregious moments from history when politicians do this, but I don't think they were ever the norm. And the fact that we know about that statement in of itself tells us that that wasn't the norm. And I think now it is, and that to me is a problem.
Yeah, no, I agreed. Godwin's law seems to have travelled far and wide in the population in general. So, I mean, before we just have a chat about your excellent new book, as Titania McGrath, what is it on Twitter that you tend to find gets her suspended more than others? What have you managed to hone in on? What particular area of social justice that you're mocking that seems to get you in trouble with the Twitter overlords?
It's an interesting one. No, there's no real reason. There's never a reason given, and there's never a reason that I can really discern. And this is why I've been left to speculate. It's because they lack transparency, that you've got no alternative but to speculate. And I could be wrong. Maybe it is just algorithms and I'm just getting caught up in some strange, bizarre thing. But it does feel a little coincidental since it happens so frequently. And given that, 10 or 11 satirical accounts all got nuked on the same afternoon, that doesn't suggest to me that this is an accident. And it does. Then you start thinking, am I being conspiratorial? But I don't think so. I mean, there's no real reason, because if you look at her tweets, there's nothing really offensive about them to me. I mean, I don't, I'm not like an edgelord who says the most shocking possible thing on Twitter all the time. In a sense, if I was that, I would understand more, even though I wouldn't agree with it. I don't think that Twitter should be in the business of censoring what people say, but at least I'd have an understanding of why it was. But I just don't do that, So it's weird to me.
Yeah, the transparency thing is a huge issue. If they could just tell you the issue, and then obviously if you were stepping a line, you could consider readjusting your behaviour. So it's very authoritative. So go ahead.
Yeah, which again is wrong, isn't it? I mean, I don't think that's the thing they should be doing. But as you say, if I know they've got these thousands of people that monitor content, and the complaints come in, and then they check the complaint, and then they just press a button, ban the account or whatever. But if every time they did that, they had to put a little note saying why, the individual operator, had to just put a little justification why, and that could be sent to the user, that would sort of solve the problem, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
We'd all at least have some. But the reason they don't do that is they want to keep the terms of service nebulous, precisely so they can ban people without having to explain. And the things that I get messages through saying, you've broken the terms of service, and you reply and you say, what have I done? What rule have I broken? And you get an automated response that doesn't tell you what rule you've broken. Now, there's a book by Franz Kafka in which this happens called The Trial. And I think it's exactly the same thing. The man is committed. He's been told he's committed a crime, but no one at any point in the novel tells him what it is he has done. And he has to go to these committee meetings, and there's all these conversations take place, and he has to seek help. And I think you probably know what happens in the end, but I won't spoil it.
Spoiler alert. I mean, I
think everyone knows what happens to him at the end. But the point is that right up to the end, no one ever finds out what the crime is. And that is what's. It happened to Christopher Hitchens, didn't it? When he was, where is it he'd gone? And he said to himself, I'm not going to use the word Orwellian, and I'm not going to use Kafka. And then he was arrested, and he said, what are you arresting me for? And they said, we don't have to tell you. And he said, well, oh God, they've made me do it. I have to use the Kafka reference now. They've made me do it. I wish I could remember where he was. It might even be in the Czech Republic under communism. I'll have to look that up. But this is the point, is that they keep these terms of service so vague. They don't want you to know why.
It is very much like a North Korean sort of thing, isn't it? This idea of you're not quite sure where the lines are, but we can punish you at any moment. Keeps you on edge.
Keeps you on your toes, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I've worked out through Twitter is that if you say things that can be taken literally to incite violence, right? So if you say something like, "Oh, I'm going to kill you for that," or "I'll punch you for that," or whatever, and someone reports that tweet, that often gets you a suspension.
Right.
Even if it's like to your friend, right? So I've learned that that's one way to avoid, because that was the first time when she got a permanent ban. It was because she'd said she was going to a UKIP march to punch people in the name of tolerance.
Yeah.
So I think because that was then reported and flagged, but see, they reversed that in the end, obviously. But that made me think that, and then something else happened where I was talking to a friend of mine actually about how it was a joke thing between friends, and because most of my tweets apparently get reported, I think it just got flagged in their system. So yeah, I think that's one way you can avoid. If I'm going to put a hint out there, that's one way you can avoid their algorithms. I imagine they've also got algorithms that pick on phrases like punch and stuff. Although I noticed they don't seem to ban the accounts that threaten actual physical and sexual violence against J.K. Rowling. That's an interesting.
Some in relation to that, some account threatened to kneecap me on site the other day, and no action there. So I mean, it's all fun and games, but I mean, maybe if they'd misgendered me, action.
Then,
yeah.
Well, that's actual violence.
Yes,
Stephen. That's what you've got to understand.
That's it.
Kneecapping in the name of peace is fine.
Self-defense, really, in response to my
against your bad
hate speech.
Words.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your new book, Under the Guise of Titania, McGrath. My first little book of intersectional activism. I have it here. I bought a physical copy just in case I felt the need to burn it at any point. So it's difficult to book burn if you're, majoritively Kindle. Suppose it's the same thing with a fire.
Yep. Exactly.
So tell me about this genre, this idea of people writing books of activism for essentially infants or very young adults, because this isn't something you just invented. There's a whole industry of books that are sincere under this sort of format, isn't there?
Not only that, I mean, I was in the Waterstones in Hitchin the other day, and the table had the table of children's books was all these things were sort of prominently displayed, and was it Hitchin? Anyway, it was one of the Waterstones anyway, and they were prominently displayed. Anti-Racist Baby was there by Ibram X. Kendi, for instance. Good Night Story for Rebel Girls. I can't remember the authors. There's 2 authors of that one. And there's loads of these books. I mean, it feels like I'm making them up, and I'm not. Feminist Baby is the one Joe Rogan told me about. Feminist Baby. I think. All of these books, I mean, if you look through Anti-Racist Baby, because it's very short, it's about 7 pages long, you'll just see it's insane. Like, there's no way a baby could understand this stuff. A baby couldn't understand how it needs to confess its own racism and its complicity and white supremacy or whatever. It's hilarious. And, well, the premise is wrong anyway. For a start, babies aren't white supremacists, are they? Let's just be honest about that.
Oh, they've got the skinhead by default.
Well, maybe that's it then. Maybe that's why he's confused. But no, it's absolutely insane, and they're doing really well. They're selling really well. I imagine really what it is. It's parents want something on their coffee table that shows how virtuous they are. I guess. Yeah. I mean, that's the only explanation I could possibly think of. Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, I kind of understand because it's female icons from history. I don't have a problem with that particularly, actually. But I do mock it in the book because I did find it funny that. They've got this whole chapter on Coco Chanel, but they don't mention that she was a Nazi collaborator. They just leave that bit. And that, I think, I mean, it wasn't like she just had a little brush with them. Like, she was full on
Nazi, yeah.
So that's quite an omission.
Yeah.
It's like talking about Harold Shipman, but leaving out the murders. He was a nice, congenial doctor with a beard.
Lovely beard. Yeah.
I mean, that's. But to me, I wanted to write the book because I found it funny. I just found it funny. That kind of indoctrination with no shame and no attempt to disguise what it's trying to do is hilarious. I mean, most of it's quite subtle, isn't it? When you see like Doctor Who, I mean, Doctor Who's fully woke now, and in a sense, there's something annoying about that because then you've got this insidious training that they're trying to do this insidious form of social engineering, aren't they, through Doctor Who? By putting all these woke messages in there. And we can all see it. Well, I mean, that's funny in its own way because we can all see it. It's so flagrant and therefore it is laugh out loud funny. And of course, the quality of the programme descends because it becomes didactic. And didactic work is never particularly entertaining. You feel like you're being hectored and shouted at all the time. with something that is overly didactic, like Anti-Racist Baby, or sort of just explicit about its indoctrination, that's even funnier to me. I mean, that book, Who Are You, I think it's called, A Kid's Guide to Gender Identity. This is aimed at 3-year-olds and above, and it's talking about like two-spirit, genderqueer, gender fluidity. And I mean, are you mad? Do you think a 3-year-old really wants to explore their gender identity in this way? You know? Or do they just want their next Rusk or whatever? You know? I mean, it's almost like they haven't met kids.
Yeah.
It's almost like they just don't know what children are. It's funny.
And it's worrying, especially to me, in regards to talking about skin colour in an overtly progressive far left manner, because I can't help but feel that we're bringing a load of people up through the generations now who wouldn't have considered their skin colour or anybody else's had they just been allowed the space and time to, you know, progress. And now they're constantly being told they are defined solely by their skin colour, and in fact your viewpoints on certain issues aren't as worthy as others, and you are a contributor to a lot of misery in the world solely by your existence. And I can't help but feel that's going to have a really negative consequence of a resurgence of white nationalism at some point, and that really scares me.
It does, and it will have that effect, and it will make ours a more racist society. It already is.
Yeah.
It's desperately sad and depressing to think that we have this whole generation who just, we'd reached the point where these young people, they wouldn't have even considered race as being an issue, and now they're being invited, as you say, to consider it primarily as the most important issue. It's such a sad, depressing, regressive, reactionary development. It's we were almost there. We were almost there as a society, and we fucked it.
Yep.
At the last hurdle. Why? And so that's why I think it's really important to restate the values of social liberalism, restate the values of colourblindness, which is still the best ideal, no matter what they tell you, and no matter how much they try to problematize Martin Luther King, it is still the best way to proceed. And we know it is because we can look at the achievements since the civil rights movements in the 60s. We can see the achievements of social liberalism over the past 60 years. They work. And that doesn't mean that we eradicated racism and eradicated sexism, but it did a hell of a lot more than critical race theory has ever done or ever will do. You know, it's not as though the opposition to critical race theory isn't an opposition to opposing racism, if that makes sense. What we're saying is there are better ways to oppose racism, and the better way is the liberal way.
This idea that just because you're disagreeing with a solution to the bad thing, you must somehow be agreeing with the bad thing, and them are two completely separate things in my mind, for sure. But
we're talking about infantile thinking.
Yeah,
that's the problem. And because the whole discourse has degraded to such an extent that we shouldn't even have to make these points. We shouldn't even have to say it, but we do. Whenever I'm talking about critical race theory and things, I'm feeling like I have to constantly put in these caveats about how I oppose racism, and I think I kind of resent it.
Yeah.
Obviously I do.
That should be assumed. You should have to work very hard to disprove that default status, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very sad. I vacillate between finding it funny and finding it depressing.
Well, might be just worth talking a little bit about the potential re-election of Donald Trump, because that's been a catalyst for a lot of people either focusing more on this social justice ideology, and it's also been a catalyst for a lot of people doubling down in their far left ideology. And you've got a chapter in your Titania McGrath's new book on Hillary Clinton, which is hilarious, and it really laments her loss and the fact that she didn't become president, although I suppose she is in Titania's eyes. But you've got this excellent line in there about doing some soul searching after losing the election, and it's Titania's conclusion that the reason the election was lost is because she didn't call people racist enough. And I think that's great, because that really did play into the election of Donald Trump. So I suppose my question is, have you seen anything since then that would suggest to you that the opposition to all things Trump and sort of conservatives and quote-unquote right-wing ideology, have you seen anything in response to that would suggest to you they've now got their shit together and they can I knew I wouldn't get through the question. It's depressing, isn't it?
It's hilarious. No, I mean, they're worse than ever they were.
Yeah.
They're calling people racist with a greater frequency and greater ease, and talking about neo-Nazism and fascism and everything. The difference now, I mean, had this just run its course, Trump would be sailing through right now. But of course, the coronavirus hit, and that has changed absolutely everything. That's the real game changer now. And he didn't handle it well. And the economy, which had been doing incredibly well, tanked. So, and also, of course, with the Black Lives Matter protests, with the violence, with the destruction of monuments, with the people, I think are nervous because Trump is not best equipped to handle that kind of thing, is he? So, and there's a sense in which Democrats are there's a kind of soft kind of blackmail going on. Almost like if you don't vote for us, these riots will continue. That sort of sense about it, and maybe that'll be effective. I don't know, but I mean, no, they haven't learned at all. It's the most infantile run up to an election I've ever heard in terms of the way that people are talking about it, the way that people are mischaracterizing their opponents, and it's the culture war election, isn't it? And unfortunately, whoever wins, the culture war is only going to get worse. Yeah,
I wouldn't even be a little bit shocked to see Trump get a second term.
Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've swore off political predictions now, actually, so I reserve the right to pull that statement back. But it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's not a done deal, is it? And again, all the polling data is suggesting that Biden has an edge, and we saw where that went last time as well, didn't we?
Well, also, every time one of these videos goes viral of protesters bursting into restaurants and forcing people to put the fist up and say Black Lives Matter, or just beating people up or shooting people because of their skin color, and all of this plays into his hands. It's lawlessness. And I know Nancy Pelosi the other day pretty conclusively stated that she felt that violence wasn't acceptable, but it took her fucking ages. Biden has been dilly-dallying around the same issue for ages. They needed to come out straight away and say, in a liberal democracy, violence is never acceptable. Like, just very, very clearly and explicitly.
Yeah, and the thing is, they probably would have only lost people who might not have voted for them anyway. These are like far-left socialists who probably don't like the Democrats either a lot of the time.
Well, they weren't going to vote for Trump, though, were they?
No.
So it's not like they were wavering voters like that. It would have been really the same. I mean, they would have had it in the bag, actually. I think if Biden had come out really early and just denounced that. There was a really interesting article in the Spectator USA the other day by, I think, Stephen Daisley, saying that, the speech about critical race theory and the history of America, that's the speech that Joe Biden should have made. And that's the speech, Donald Trump made this speech, where he rightly called out the 1619 Project for its historical revisionism. I mean, even its own fact checkers were nervous about the fact that it so flagrantly revised history. And it still won the Pulitzer, of course, which again sends a strong message that, if a historically inaccurate project can win the Pulitzer, then it just shows how wokeified these institutions have become. It doesn't even matter anymore. It's about the politics. It's not about the history or the quality of the work. Biden should be doing that. Biden should be saying there's no place for critical race theory in our schools.
But these are open goals for a political candidate, aren't they? I mean, these are easy issues to make the right noises on. I mean, to me, and the fact that they're either unwilling or unable is I think signals a defeatist attitude from the offset.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, this is my fear, is that because the Democrats are bought into identity politics to such an extent. I mean, I know they did last time with Clinton as well, but full on now, and now it's become that's their sort of thing now, and Trump is of course taking the oppositional stance, so it is becoming. That's why I say it's the culture war election, because that is what this is about, really, isn't it? Now and I can't see the riots stopping whichever way this goes.
No. It's very concerning to see America even descend into this sort of street level violence, and there's a lot of people who are really pushing this notion of an upcoming civil war. And if you'd have said that to me 5 years ago, I would have thought you was a conspiratorial loon, but you can kind of envision the way things have been going these last few years of something similar happening, where people are responding to these. I mean, we have already seen it in little instances where people are meeting these protesters with weapons as well and responding with violence. And it's a terrible situation that just needed someone to get hold of it and to explicitly say on all sides that this sort of political violence is completely unacceptable, regardless of which area of the political, scale it's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to take a stance. Like, you've got to accept that political violence is an oxymoron. It's not something that anyone should encourage or enable, or and especially if it's coming from your own side, just take a stance on this. Don't be cowardly.
Agreed. That's a great point to end on, Andrew. We've flown through everything again. Is there anything else?
It always goes so quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Does.
And you didn't fall asleep. You're still with us. You're looking bright and bushy-tailed.
Okay. Am I? Okay, but that's all right. I've still got another couple of hours work in me this evening, I think. So I think,
wow,
as long as I'm alert.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I'm very pleased to hear as well that you're writing a book from your perspective. I really enjoy your writing with Spiked as well. It's always very clear. It's always very thoughtful as well. You're not somebody who is hostile with your writing or goes on the attack. You really do like to consider both sides of the argument. So of course, I appreciate that in your writing as well.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you saying so.
Right, it's been great to catch up. Thanks for speaking to me again.
All right, until next time.
Till next time.